Tonight, new lows on Wall Street meet record high prices on Main Street.
Everything is getting too high. Food, gas, everything. It's hard for you to make a living and go to work.
Fueling fears over the state of the economy. And a historic moment. The State Department reopening the American Embassy in Kyiv after closing its doors 3 months ago as Russian forces advanced on the Ukrainian capital. Plus, germ warfare.
We must be prepared for the next inevitable biosecurity crisis.
After the COVID pandemic exposed U.S. vulnerabilities to a possible biological attack. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Fear growing over possible recession in America. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And good evening in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Well, rising prices relentlessly hitting Americans hard virtually across every sector, and the cost of living seemingly increasing day by day.
And meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, lawmakers are struggling to come up with a plan to bring some kind of relief to hurting families. And of course, with the midterm elections now less than 6 months away, it's an issue on voters' minds. Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka has our top story tonight. Matt?
Well, the national average for the price of gasoline keeps breaking records, topping $4.58 this week and topping $4 in every state for the first time ever. Combine that with rising prices of other goods like food and a baby formula shortage, and it adds up to Americans wondering when there will be any relief in sight. Record high gas prices, soaring inflation. Americans continue to feel the squeeze on their wallets. It's an issue that touches not just the bottom lines of families, but it's also on the mind of almost every lawmaker. Republicans are hitting the Biden administration hard and blaming the president and Democrats for the crisis.
This is out of control, and it doesn't have to be this way. $4.52 a gallon. I mean, that was the price yesterday, and it continues to tick upward. And all of this is a function of the inflationary policies of the current administration. They are cutting off oil and gas production here domestically. They're begging dictators to increase access to oil and gas, and they flooded the market with all kinds of spending that drives up the cost of oil and gas, as well as other things.
Fears of a recession are on the horizon as retailers like Target and Walmart are sounding the alarm that rising prices aren't easing. For Democrats, it's a nightmare scenario in an election year. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi touted Democrat-led efforts to earmark money to address the baby formula shortage and stop gas price gouging, hitting back against Republicans that didn't vote for the measures. The economic issues will likely spill over into the voting booths in November.
Absolutely no intention by the Democrats not winning the House in November. I think that in terms of the work that this president has done, and he's been a great president. I don't know about polls, but I do know about winning the races one district at a time.
Earlier today, the House did pass a bill that allows the Federal Trade Commission to investigate alleged price gouging at the pump, and companies could be penalized for excessive prices. The bill would need to clear 60 votes in the Senate, which could be a tough hill to climb. John and Jenna.
All right, Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka, thank you, Matt. And for more, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst at Bankrate.com. Mark, welcome. The economy really taking a toll on the mental health in America. It's something, we've talked about before with you and Bankrate putting out a survey on the subject. Mark, talk a little bit about what can be done to help.
Well, first of all, we just have to get through this difficult period, and we will get through it. We always have as a country, and we will as individuals. But, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said recently there will probably be some pain associated with the effort to bring down inflation as the central bank does what it can do by withdrawing accommodation, taking some of its stimulus out of the system, and raising interest rates. As individuals, there's the sort of working on our mental health piece and what we're specialists in at Bankrate in terms of paying attention to personal finances. And it really involves the things that we need to be doing all the time, but being very focused right now on trying to reduce expenses, and consumers are clearly working on that right now. We had a retailer this week talk about how people are buying a half gallon of milk instead of a full gallon because the price of milk is high. I think over time we will see some so-called demand destruction with gasoline. People will eventually cut back on their driving, but this summer, of course, they're eager to get out and about as the vacation season beckons.
In keeping with tradition, Mark, you know, it's Thursday, so we always talk about unemployment numbers. They were up again this week, the fourth week in a row, but there is a silver lining there concerning unemployment benefits.
Absolutely. So we watch new jobless claims. That's the closest thing to a real-time measure of what's going on in the job market as a gauge of layoffs. And these numbers, just above 200,000, as you say, did rise this past week, are still historically low. In the past, we would look at it as if we got below 400,000, the job market would be strong, and we're about half that level. But as you say, John, we saw a decline in continuing claims. The number of people who are receiving benefits through traditional regular state programs, that's at the lowest level since 1969. So on the one hand, we have all these conflicting and volatile aspects of the economy, and inflation's at the top of that list. On the other hand, the job market's strong, which ironically can be a source of some inflation.
Yeah. Mark, you know, this has, of course, been a volatile week for Wall Street. What effect is that having on Americans, and are people still wanting to invest?
Well, they should invest because what they're doing, what they have right now is an opportunity to buy at a lower price, and everybody needs to save for their retirement. So it's not necessarily that they need those funds tomorrow or next week or in the next 6 months, but they will need access to those funds and the superior return that the stock market provides over time as a way of actually keeping pace and beating inflation. But, you know, there are wealth impacts with this decline in the stock market, which research has shown that even people who aren't directly invested in the stock market, and that's roughly 40% of the population that is, even the people who aren't directly invested feel a negative consequence of a big stock market decline like we've seen. So this does have an economic ramification, and it also weighs on the mentality of consumers who are already reeling from high inflation.
All right, Bankrate Senior Economic Analyst and Washington Bureau Chief Mark Hamrick. Thank you so much, Mark, for your time.
Thank you.
Well, overseas tonight, the head of NATO says he's confident Sweden and Finland will soon be admitted into the alliance. As Russia's war against Ukraine rages on, the two nations are seeking to join the 30-country military group. Today, leaders from Sweden and Finland met with President Biden to discuss the NATO expansion.
Both Finland and Sweden are already working in coordination with the United States and our other allies and partners to support the brave people of Ukraine. And having two new NATO members in the high north will enhance the security of our alliance and deepen our security cooperation across the board.
And today, the U.S. Senate approved a $40 billion package in funding for Ukraine. The measure now heads to the president's desk. Meanwhile, in Ukraine tonight, as more fighters in the besieged city of Mariupol surrender to Russian forces, the Red Cross says hundreds have been added to the list of prisoners of war, bringing the total to more than 1,700 Ukrainian POWs from the city. But some good news in Kyiv. The U.S. has now reopened its embassy there 3 months after it closed and relocated staff.
And for more, let's bring in Michael McGonigal of Focus on the Family. He's been freelance reporting with a team in Ukraine. Michael, welcome. We're now 84 days into Putin's military campaign in Ukraine. You now have had a chance to see the effects of the war up close and personal, traveling between Lviv and Kyiv. Michael, what stands out to you most?
I think, John, what stands out to me the most is the resilience of the people here and their kindness. We had translators lined up in Kyiv and Lviv, but in between those two places, of course, we didn't have anybody to translate for us. And so inevitably, we had to get food, we had to get gas, we had to get other supplies. And that entire time, the people went out of their way to make sure that we were taken care of despite their own problems. And they have this kindness about them. We were put first above their needs, and their resilience is inspiring. Despite what's happened to them, and some horrible things have happened here, they believe there's going to be victory, and they believe that their lives are going to get back to normal. And so we're grateful for them.
Yeah. Michael, can you talk about some of the needs you are seeing? You know, people in hard-hit areas like Mariupol lack the basics. We're hearing, you know, food, water, electricity. But what is life like now in places where Ukrainians either regained a foothold or fended off attacks like Irpin? Is life somewhat returning to normal?
Sure. We spoke to a woman today, actually, at a field hospital here in Lviv who escaped from Mariupol. She spent 2 months in her basement, only to get out a few weeks ago. But here in Lviv, life is returning to somewhat normal. Supplies are easy to get. You can get food, you can get necessities. In Kyiv, it's a little bit different. Food is hard to come by. Gas here is very hard to come by. People are waiting in line for 4 to 6 hours to get 20 liters of gas. And it's incredible because, again, we experienced that with them here. You know, we were on our way back from Kyiv yesterday, and we were getting close to needing gas to reach Lviv. And we waited in line for 4 or 5 hours. We were 3 cars from the gas pump, and we got an air raid warning. Missiles were inbound. So they had to shut down the gas station. All the power goes out. We get in line, and we wait another hour and a half, and the lights came back on, and we were able to get gas. And it was in that moment the lights came back on, and hope came back on as well. But nobody left the line. They stayed there because that's what they needed. And now we hope that supplies are continuing to be replenished. And the people, despite those problems, are continuing to be optimistic. They're continuing to be hopeful. And they're continuing to live their lives, which I have to tell you is truly inspiring, again, considering what they've been through.
Yeah. All right, Michael McGonigal, our thanks to you for taking the time to talk to us this evening and share your reflections. Stay safe.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
The future of Pennsylvania politics still uncertain. The latest on the too close to call Republican Senate primary race after this.
Welcome back. Well, Oklahoma may soon have the nation's most strict abortion law in the land. The state's legislature approving a pro-life measure today prohibiting all abortions beginning at fertilization. That is, unless the procedure saves the life of the mother or the pregnancy is a result of rape or incest that's officially been reported to authorities. The bill now heads to the desk of the state's Republican governor, who is expected to sign it into law.
Well, the vote count tabulating absentee ballots in Pennsylvania is still going on, meaning the neck-and-neck GOP Senate primary race almost certainly will be heading for a recount. TV's Dr. Mehmet Oz, who received former President Trump's coveted endorsement, essentially is tied with former hedge fund CEO David McCormick. When all ballots are processed, a recount automatically triggers if the race is within half a percentage point margin.
And here now for more, Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, good to have you this evening. Former President Trump is now calling on Dr. Oz, who he endorsed, to declare himself the winner. Trump saying it makes it much harder for them to cheat with votes still being counted. Nathan, what do you think about that? Do you think Dr. Oz will pull it out?
Well, it's sort of deja vu all over again. I feel like whether Dr. Oz or whether any candidate, they can declare victory all they want, but there's still the vote counting process continues on, and that's what I expect to happen. Right now, Dr. Oz is ahead by a very small margin. It's certainly possible that he remains ahead and is declared the winner. I think that either one, whether it's Dr. Oz or Dave McCormick, becomes the nominee. They both have strengths and weaknesses, but this is a race the Republicans should win and probably have to win if they want to get back to control of the Senate in November.
Well, Nathan, while the drama in Pennsylvania continues to play out, there is a primary season that is continuing to march on next week with elections in Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Minnesota, and Texas. Nathan, what are the races that you are keeping an eye on for next Tuesday?
You know, one of the big ones is the Alabama Senate race. This is where Senator Richard Shelby's not running for re-election. There are 3 main candidates. One of them is Congressman Mo Brooks, who started the race with Trump's endorsement, but then Trump pulled back on that endorsement a few weeks ago. Another major candidate is Shelby's former chief of staff named Katie Britt. She's probably likely to make the runoff at this point. And then Brooks and a third candidate, Mike Durant, who is a former helicopter pilot. He's actually the pilot that the movie Black Hawk Down was based on. And so you have Brooks and Durant jockeying for position. Trump has not gotten back involved in the race with the endorsement. We'll see if he does that when it's just 2 people in the runoff. In Arkansas, Senator Bozeman is facing a primary challenger from a former Arkansas football player named Jake Beckett. And then in Georgia, Herschel Walker is likely to be the Republican nominee against Raphael Warnock. We'll see how big of a victory Herschel Walker gets heading out of that primary.
Yeah, we'll all be watching. Nathan, a headline in Politico today: gas formula inflation, voter anxieties motivate struggling Dems. How are Democrats hoping to use these major issues to keep control of the House and Senate?
Well, it's going to be tough because right now voters are holding Democrats more responsible for these problems because Democrats are in charge in Washington. You know, I've met with actually 10 Democratic candidates for the House over the last few days, and I asked them about these troubles and why voters should send more Democrats. And usually they say, well, you know, we certainly need to empathize with voters, talk about what we're doing or what Democrats on the Hill are doing to solve these problems, and remind people that this is a global problem. It's not unique to the United States. You know, all of those things sound good. I'm not sure how well it's going to resonate with voters because ultimately this is a midterm, and Biden, how well Biden is doing is going to affect how well Democrats do on the ballot.
All right, Nathan Gonzalez with Inside Elections. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time and your insights.
Thanks, John and Jenna.
A wake-up call over biological warfare. Our adversaries know we're not prepared. How the U.S. is working to quickly change that. Next.
Welcome back. The longer Russia's war in Ukraine wears on, the more concerns grow of the threat of a biological attack. Here at home, the United States is woefully unprepared to defend itself against germ warfare.
And what's worse, the COVID pandemic showed our enemies exactly where we are most vulnerable. CBN News national security correspondent Caitlin Burke reports.
According to the State Department, both Russia and North Korea have active biological weapons programs. Iran and China aren't far behind. Yet here in the U.S., there are serious questions to whether our main system to detect a biological attack even works.
So the nation has a national biodetection system called BioWatch, and associated with that is an acquisition program called BD21. My understanding is they don't work, period, for most of the biological agents for which those systems are supposed to be detecting.
The Department of Homeland Security launched BioWatch back in 2003, and the technology hasn't been updated since. Dr. Asha George, Executive Director of the Commission on Biodefense, says it's time for DHS to shut it down.
There needs to be some kind of transfer of technology or transfer of mission out of the Department of Homeland Security to somebody else if DHS can't handle it. And if it's a basic science issue, then we need to get the science and technology community, the basic research people back involved to produce something.
We recently saw the issues with this detection technology play out when the first U.S. case of COVID-19 was officially confirmed on January 21st, 2020. But studies suggest the virus started circulating here up to a month earlier.
We must be prepared for the next inevitable biosecurity crisis. If COVID lessons learned do not teach us the value of preparedness, I do not know what will. Waiting for the next crisis to take action is too late.
Experts, including Dr. George, recently testified about biosecurity before the Senate Homeland Security Committee. George pointed out a lack of investment in this area puts the country at an extreme disadvantage.
Russia and China are investing billions into their bioeconomy, and part of doing that is investment in protective technologies, vaccines, personal protective equipment, and anything else that will bring the economic aspect of biology in the 21st century up to the next level.
One response element in desperate need of funding is the Strategic National Stockpile.
The stockpile is postured for a rapid, coordinated response.
Originally created to ensure the nation's readiness against agents of bioterrorism like anthrax, SNS has evolved and now also contains stores of vaccines, treatments, and equipment.
Yeah, so the Strategic National Stockpile is kind of like a pantry. And just like you're going to make something you don't make that often, but you walk into the pantry and you say, oh, here's my sea salt, and here's my baker's yeast. You go and you pull it off, you use it when you need it.
Sticking with that analogy, when we needed the baker's yeast, it had expired. Investment has been sporadic over the years due to a lack of biological threats.
Things will get worse than they are right now.
Then, when COVID hit, supplies were diminished, expired, or the technology was out of date. Senator Bill Cassidy says the SNS needs serious reform, and he believes it can be done in a way that helps to solve the funding problem.
I would like it so that it could be cycled out, not wasted, and then replaced on the back end. Because if you're selling something a year before it expires, you've got money to buy something new.
Cassidy says the pandemic is now the playbook for biological warfare, which makes learning quickly from our mistakes a matter of national security.
We'll never know for sure whether or not that virus started in a Wuhan lab or just spontaneously occurred. But what we do know is that now our enemies know how to do it. You would come up with a designer virus. You would simultaneously come up with a highly effective vaccine. You would give the vaccine to all your people, and then you'd release the virus.
Given the COVID wake-up call, the government is moving to address various gaps, including legislation to reform the national stockpile and new investigations by both the intelligence community and the Pentagon, delving into the potential threats we face and where our biodefense currently stands.
To have a threat increase without significant effort to try and at least prevent it from getting worse only puts us and the rest of the world in a situation where if a biological weapon were to be used, it's going to be that much more catastrophic. We can't have that.
In 2015, the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense laid out 33 recommendations to prepare for a large-scale biological event. To date, only 3 have been fully completed. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. Coming up, learning the powerful lesson of perseverance from the fast footwork of a little track star, motivating millions to never give up.
Finally tonight, talk about a comeback after losing her shoe at the start of a track race in Omaha, Nebraska. Talia Crawford refused to let it trip her up.
That's right. The 7-year-old not only deciding to stay in the race, but catching up to her competitors and eventually even outrunning them. The little girl's father, boxer Terrence Crawford, recorded it all on camera. A mishap on the track that would have left most too flustered to finish left onlookers inspired. Look at her go. It's amazing. Wow. She lost that shoe and managed just to eclipse all of the other runners.
You know, I think she has a bright future.
Absolutely. Maybe in track?
Yeah. Good for her. That's going to do it for Faith Nation.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.